So now we can begin. I turn on our public live transmission. My colleague joined all the other spectators of this conference. So I know that a lot of the speakers know each other, but I want to introduce to our spectators, our speakers, Andrew Rasiulis, fellow of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, Robert Cutler, also he is also a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, Diane, editor-at-large at National Post, columnist for American Interests, Atlantic Council Ukraine Alert, and Kyiv Post. Her Excellency Larisa Galadza, Ambassador of Ukraine to Canada. Zenon Potoczny, President of Canadian Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. Leslav Kvashik, COO at the Black Iron, Canadian iron ore exploration and development company of the Shmanevsky project located in Kryvosheya, Ukraine. And Yuriy Kryvosheya, managing partner and the president of Toronto-Kyiv, member of the board of director of the Canadian Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. I think that I have to start with my introducing as a moderator. So my name is Product Taras, and I'm a co-founder of think tank Cadastra. And in the debut in this year, we have launched the special project, Ukraine-Canada Strategic Dialogue. And during this panel, during this dialogue, we are building a bridge between the Ukrainian and Canadian experts, the businessmen, and the policymakers. We have carried our first panel where the Ukraine side was invited. Government officials, diplomats, and trade organization was invited to see the Ukrainian point of view of our relations. And today we have the panel mostly with the speakers from the Canada and the Canadian side. So this is an opportunity to see the Canadian point of view to our relations. First of all, I want to thank to all speakers who agreed to participate in our panel. And I think that I have to start with a little explanation of our relations. And to my mind, throughout the whole history of Ukrainian independence, it's really hard to set an example of more friendly and reliable relations aimed at the development of Ukrainian statehood without infringing on its sovereignty. However, our relations, like any existing process, need the constant development. And after the proclamation of the Act of Independence of Ukraine, Canada was one of the first countries that recognized its independence in 1991. And in less than 6 months, it established the official relations with Ukraine. So in this January 27, in 2022, Ukraine and Canada will celebrate the 30th anniversary of establishing diplomatic relations. So we both have the long-standing, strong historical ties. However, it's time come when reproducing the historical connection and historical ties is no longer effective. We must seek the common interest and develop them. Such state interests include the economic ones, which we will discuss together with our speakers today. So I remind to all spectators that during this panel, they can leave their questions at the link attached to the chat to this conference Zoom. I will duplicate it because I think that if some lose it, it will rise again. So I think it's high time to start our first block of speakers' individual speech, and let's continue in the order that I have announced the all speaker list. So Andrew will start our block, and Andrew, are you with us?
I'm with you, and thank you very much, Taras. Thanks for bringing us together, and we are from Canadian Global Affairs Institute. We appreciate the partnership that we've established with Astra, and Robert Cutler and I are joining as part of the CGAI team. We hope this will be a benefit to all who are viewing, and it's great also to see a number of old friends on the Zoom chat here today too. I think as my background suggests, I've been involved with Ukraine since the very beginning of its independence. When I came back from Vienna and negotiating the arms control agreements in '92, my job was essentially establish bilateral defense cooperation relations with all of the former Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, who brought me to Ukraine in my first trip, October '93. And we immediately began a process of military cooperation based on defense reform And Ukraine, from that time on to today, I even checked my old DNTC website, and Ukraine is still ranked as the highest recipient of Canadian military training cooperation funding. That is actually testament to two factors. One, strategically, Ukraine, I mean, as everyone here knows, occupies a keystone strategic part of Europe. And that's why it's the focus today of so many military forces exercising with live ammunition today because of the strategic importance of Ukraine. It is that bridge between East and West. So it's a keystone country of Europe. Canada has always recognized that, and we have always put our resources up front. And this is not just on the military sphere, but of course on the foreign affairs and what's known as the Canadian International Development Agency, CEDA, which is now part of foreign affairs. We have always put up our foremost, our package for reform in Europe because of Ukraine's strategic location. There's another dimension, and many people here on the screen represent that, which is a Canadian-Ukrainian diaspora. I mean, it's no secret. It's on the Canadian Foreign Affairs website, and it was all in my briefing notes. 1.3 million Canadian Ukrainians are in Canada, and they form a very important cultural heritage and political heritage of Canada. And so that's also a recognition. They have been a dynamic force. And a little sort of side note, and diasporas are important everywhere. And one example comes to mind. In the early days when I was starting relations with Ukraine, a Ukrainian official once said to me, he said, you know, the Americans have this relationship with Israel because the Jewish diaspora and the lobby in the US is very strong. And what we're hoping for is, given the predominant strength of the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, that we will have a similar relationship, you know, that strong bond that the United States has with Israel, that Canada would have with Ukraine. And, you know, to some degree, that has actually manifested itself today. I mean, Canada, in a bilateral sense and in a multilateral sense, stands very firm with Ukraine. And they are, in terms of the crisis that's actually evolving today, the Canadian government is first and foremost standing with Ukraine in its aspirations. So that's the broad push. So the point is that both from a geopolitical point of view and from an internal domestic Canadian politics point of view, Ukraine remains of paramount importance to Canada. It's a constant. And it's a constant for since 1991, and it is in the present crisis. And we see where we go from this crisis onwards. And Canada is certainly up there. And the next few days, weeks, will be extremely important to see how this develops. I mean, there is this, I believe, tomorrow in Paris. Zelensky's going there. Merkel will be involved with that. Putin, you know, and Biden may meet at some point in time in the next few weeks. So there's lots going on. And I know this is about economics. But that's important because at the end of the day, God willing, we'll get beyond this crisis and we'll get back to building Ukraine. And reform is the key thing. I mean, it's always been that, it's a mantra, but it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. The legacy of the Soviet Union and that period is fundamental to understanding how difficult it is for a country like Ukraine to move beyond that cultural past, that political past, into the contemporary world and to be, let's say, in a European standard sort of thing, a constant challenge. But huge strides have been taken, huge. And so I think at this point, not monopolize anymore and let the economic experts take up from there. But I think that Canada, essentially from a bilateral point of view, I'm sure the ambassador would concur, is that in fact, we are first and foremost, and it's a very solid relationship that will continue throughout this crisis and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your opinion and your like a brief of our relations. So I want to let Robert express his speech. Robert, are you with us?
Yes, you can hear me?
Yeah, actually, we're hearing you.
Very good, thank you. I first want to express my thanks for the invitation to be amongst you. I am not an expert on Ukraine, but I've been asked to give a broader, zoomed out view of things. I wish to begin by telling you a little bit about how I first encountered Ukrainian affairs. This was many years ago when I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan. My best friend in graduate school was James Mace, who, as you know, is the stellar historian of the Holodomor, who put it on the map of Western consciousness. I think it's no exaggeration to say this. And so I stayed in touch with him before and after he moved to Ukraine. And I always think of him when I have occasion to discuss Ukrainian affairs. Usually when I address Ukrainian affairs, it's from the standpoint of energy security. I started out as actually an expert in Soviet foreign policy toward Western Europe. And after 1991, I expanded beyond Russia. I don't pay as much attention to Russia as I paid to the Soviet Union, and look at the Caspian, well, it's the Eurasian continent, actually. I started in the Caspian Sea in 1991 and followed the pipelines, and now they go from Brussels to Beijing. Now, I was introduced correctly as a fellow of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, and I'm very happy to be here with Andrew, and I hope that we have a deeper contact in the future. One of my other hats, which I use only for energy specific talks, is that I am Senior Research Fellow and Director of the Energy Security Program at the NATO Association of Canada. And we have held in the last year two very well attended and with great interest webinars on the Nord Stream pipeline, Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So this is really the approach that I take. Everything has already been said that needs to be said about the historical relations between Canada and Ukraine, both from the immigration in the 19th century, which, it is interesting to me, came mostly from Western Ukraine, or what is now Western Ukraine, which of course did not become part of Ukraine in the Soviet era until after the Second World War, and is therefore also part of contemporary Ukraine. So I just want to say that I think in the West, the Ukraine is malperceived, is incorrectly perceived as being on a borderland of Europe, because Europe is identified with the European Union, thanks to the great publicity that the European Union makes for itself. And that, in my view, of course, this is an error, that Ukraine is properly part of Central and Eastern Europe, and that it's the only place in Europe where there is an ongoing military conflict, unless one counts the South Caucasus, which I spend a lot of attention on, which technically are also part of Europe. So I wish only to emphasize in my modest remarks, which are not those of a Ukrainian specialist, the centrality of Ukraine to European and to NATO affairs, which is therefore important to Canada because it's a NATO member. I recall that in his book, The Grand Chessboard, which I'm sure you all know, that published in the late 1990s, Zbigniew Brzezinski put forward the idea that the core of Europe should be the four important, large, populated countries of France, Germany, Poland, and Ukraine. And this was before the enlargements of the European Union in 2004. And at which time I told my friends in Brussels that if they were able to make the smallest gesture to Ukraine, that Ukraine would respond with great enthusiasm, but unfortunately that did not happen. Well, I want to stop before I exhaust my store of information about Ukraine I chose not to. I can take questions upon the energy issues, but I'm certain that you all don't need to be told about that. I just want to express my gratitude for being included in this esteemed group and make my modest contribution here.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for touching the topic of the Ukrainian security, particularly in energetic field, that is relative to the safety of the foreign capital. So now I turn the floor over to Diane.
Hi, Taras. Thank you very much for inviting me. Excuse my voice. I'm a little hoarse today. I have to take some water here. My journey with Ukraine starts with immigrating to Canada when I was a teenage bride with a draft dodger from the US. And I became a journalist, and I realized in living in Canada, there were lots of Slavic people in Canada, and most of my friends were Ukrainian and Polish, and I went to many weddings and all kinds of celebrations with my Ukrainian friends. And I became very involved in the politics that they were concerned about back home. When I became a journalist, therefore, I realized that there was probably a very large audience and a very good reason for me to take an interest in Ukraine. So my first visit to Ukraine was in February 1992, right after independence, and that was when the Soviet Union dissolved, and it dissolved because of Ukraine's departure from the bloc. And that's something that Putin will never forgive. I've been to Ukraine probably 30 times as a journalist. I've written tons about it. And I actually covered both of the revolutions. I've covered the war indirectly, and certainly the policies and politics, and the goings on since the latest revolution of dignity. The country is moving in the right direction. It's halting, it's stopping, it's sideswiped, but it is definitely moving in the right direction, and I'm very pleased with that. Compared to, and I'm going to talk a bit about the economics and the business climate required. Just go back to the fact that in about 1995, with another Ukrainian friend, we started a newspaper in Kyiv called Finance. And it was doing extremely well. We had 30 people in the newsroom. We recruited Canadian Ukrainians to work in it, and so on and so forth. And about 6 months after word went out that we were profitable, the thugs from a certain oligarch who shall remain nameless came in and took a baseball bat to our editor and stole everything. And so since then, I, of course, had, after that, for a number of years, I just didn't bother going to Ukraine because I felt it was pretty hopeless. It was just nothing more than another Russia. And then, of course, the first revolution, the Orange, and then the Revolution of Dignity, of course, turned my head, and my friends and I, we all got interested and excited in helping whatever way we could. Now Ukraine is, as I say, on the path, and I think Europe has to be congratulated for one thing, and that is money and visas. So the European Union has played its part, but it doesn't play anywhere near the part it should in terms of diplomacy and militarily. And neither does NATO, and neither do the Americans, and neither does Canada. And so now we see the result of this neglect. And that is that poor Ukraine, the poorest country in Europe, has the largest military force in Europe as a burden to defend the eastern wall of Europe, all by itself, virtually. And so Putin is now calling everyone's bluff with his mobilization at the boundary. And Biden has blinked. You should read my newsletter on Substack today about it. He definitely blinked. Putin won again. And that's because you don't play with Putin unless you think like Putin and you behave like Putin. So when you're dealing with a ruthless dictator like him, who has a hatred for Ukraine that is really beyond comprehension, you've got to have different tactics. And so I get into some of those in the piece I write in my Substack newsletter. The one I wrote on Monday, and I wrote one today. and it's gotten enormous. It's gone viral. But what does Ukraine need apart from protection? And that's the big if it gets protection, it's sufficient protection. Obviously, it has to continue to stay the course on retaining the integrity of its currency. That means the national bank, hands off as far as the national bank is concerned. Number two, the integrity economically of the country is very much dependent on compliance with what the IMF wants, period. There's no discussion, period. Bank regulations have to continue to be strong. I think they're pretty strong. They got rid of Kolomoisky and his criminal banking practices, but there's also things that are going on that I hear from business people in Ukraine that have to be cleaned up and supervised properly. I can't emphasize enough the fact that Ukraine has to put the pedal to the metal and accelerate privatization. And I'm glad to see that Parliament's willing to take on large state-owned enterprises for privatization as well. Privatization is the most important anti-corruption measure the country can take, because once you get rid of the state-owned enterprises where most of the corruption goes on, with the exceptions of those like Naftogaz that have independent supervisory governance boards, if you get rid of that, then now you have a huge cohort within the country that is in favor of anti-corruption measures, which will give wind to the backs of Zelensky and the other anti-corruption politicians. And so that is very important. Privatization has to be just go all out as fast as you can. Judicial reform, you can't have anything in enterprise going on unless they clean up the courts. And I was very pleased to see that Zelensky finally took the action, and he's dismantling that rotten court in Kyiv that's caused so much trouble, where oligarchs get whatever they want for a price. When my newspaper and my editor was beaten up, my partner and I, we had no option. We couldn't go to police, we couldn't go to courts, we couldn't even hire a lawyer, we couldn't go to a politician. That has to stop. That has to stop, or foreign investment will not continue and would certainly not grow. I think that there is some concern about some of the SOEs, state-owned enterprises, that have independent international supervisory boards, that some people in the presidency are chipping away at this. This has got to stop. These companies are the national champions, and they establish a code of ethics in the business world that's very important as a role model for the country. And cleaning up the infrastructure. It's very important to invest in infrastructure. But what I hear from all my friends is that those companies that build the roads and the bridges are dirty to the core. They're corrupt. So whatever dollars are being given to building roads and so on, I think there has to be some assurance for the Ukrainian taxpayers, not for the foreign investors, but for the Ukrainian taxpayers, that for every dollar you're putting into road building, it's going into road building and not 50% to oligarchs. Same with ports, same with bridges. So those are my sort of big points from my experience as not only a jaded journalist, but also as an entrepreneur who had her teeth kicked in and had no recourse. And I love Ukraine, I believe in Ukraine, and I think that conferences like this and people talking have to continue to push Biden and Europe to do the right thing. And that is to help the poorest country in Europe defend Western values.
Dear Diane, thank you for your ideas, and take care of yourself. And I wish you health and a speedy recovery. And you touched the recommendations of our bilateral policies. Did you save some ideas for the next block? Because this would be part of in the next block.
I haven't written a book on Ukraine yet.
Okay.
I've got lots more columns I'm going to write.
Thank you so much. It's high time to hand this over to Her Excellency Larisa Galadza, and I think that Larisa will touch the more economical issues in the Ukraine and possibly maybe the Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement and the possibility of the modernization of FTA.
Thank you very much, Taras. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. And I've really enjoyed listening to all the previous speakers. You know Ukraine very well. And my goodness, Diane, I would love to talk to you about all those things that you just talked about. I just got off a call with the head of the IMF delegation here in Ukraine. And every single day in Ukraine, it seems like we are helping fight a twofold battle. One is the geopolitical one, based on where Ukraine sits, and the other one is the struggle to do the right thing on anti-corruption, on judicial reform, on all those things, Diane, that you just talked about. And so it's a fascinating time to be here. I don't think there's a time in Ukraine's history that it wasn't fascinating to be here. But these days we are busy, very busy, on both of these fronts, and even as we also contend with the challenges of COVID. Sure, but instead I'm going to speak about CUFTA and modernization and why we're pursuing this and why it's important. Obviously, trade is key to Canada's prosperity and is a main avenue through which we pursue also our agenda related to liberal democratic values, inclusivity, and support for rules-based international order, free trade agreements, create economic opportunities, but they also foster openness of the kind that allows commerce, entrepreneurs to flourish. It supports migration and also a competition of ideas. And fundamentally, this is also about the international rules-based order. Our entire history is about trade in Canada, and so I'm not going to get into that, but today suffice it to say that today trade accounts for more than 60% of Canada's GDP, and exports are directly linked to 1 in 5 Canadian jobs. Trade is important. But I think it's not just what trade we do, but how we approach it as well. And as Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, has said, we pursue trade free and fair, knowing it's not a zero-sum game. When innovators on both sides of a border are free to produce and sell their best wares to a wider market, while also getting access to goods and services from the other side, everyone wins. So trade is fundamentally about people. And I think one of the reasons that we have this trade agreement with Ukraine is because of the strong people-to-people ties and the belief that entering into this trade agreement, when it is there are fewer barriers than in many countries in terms of people connecting with each other, people seeing opportunity in the other country, and I'm talking both ways, and people wanting to be closer to each other. So it's about people, it's about creating the best possible conditions for growth, for jobs, for prosperity, for individuals, and for working families. So CUFTA, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, it entered into force on August 1st, 2017, and today, 4 years later, we are embarking on its modernization. When Prime Minister Trudeau and President Zelensky announced their commitment to expand and modernize CUFTA, they recognized that this would provide an opportunity to increase CUFTA's benefits. And those benefits include further diversifying and expanding access to each other's markets, but also advancing an inclusive approach to trade in order that the benefits of that trade be widely shared. For the Canadians on this call, I think that you're going to recognize very well this refrain. I think I don't need to talk about what digitization, automation, and economic globalization has done to our wealth, but it is essential for that shared prosperity, for the gains of trade, that they be fairly and broadly distributed. And because trade works best when everyone benefits. So our trade diversification strategy advances this idea of an inclusive trade approach, and we seek to ensure that including through our modernized free trade agreements, the benefits and the opportunities of trade flow to everyone. That's really important here in Ukraine. We're, as some of you may know who study Canada's latest free trade agreements, we have gender chapters. We look specifically at small and medium-sized enterprises, and we look to expand opportunities for Indigenous peoples. So, but free trade can't only be about getting better access to each other's markets. It has to be about the people. And here again, Canada and Ukraine, if there's the one thing I hear about our relationship, it's about the long-standing and the deep people-to-people ties. So let me end it there. Actually, I'll just say one more point, and this relates to the rules-based international order. As Diane said, and many have said, Ukraine is on a path to European, Euro-Atlantic integration. And the more we stand together in agreements with values, underpinning values that we have in common, the more we figure out how to deal with the conflicts that arise in peaceful ways according to those agreements, the tighter the relationship will be in the global arena. And in the global arena, the people who share these values are being challenged. And so I'm very, very proud that we are, that we've not just had seen great benefits from CUFTA, but that we've had enough success with it that we know we can stand even closer together on more services in IT, and we can again advance the whole idea of inclusivity and sharing the benefits of those of the free trade agreement. So I will end it there and say more later.
Thank you so much for your deep analysis. And I have seen that in the plan of the Ministry of Global Affairs of Canada for 2020 and 2021, on 11th page, there is a statement that government of Canada are ready to modernization of the CUFTA. And this is the information that's really is really useful to the Ukrainian side, because it's like a direction and the willing of the Canadian government. So thank you. Besides, after the signing of the agreement, free trade agreement, Ukraine and Canada decided to establish a special program that will facilitate the economical our cooperation. It means the CUCC. In addition, I personally saw on the page of the social media at the Embassy of Canada to Ukraine that you are finding a company that will conduct audit about how effective was this program. But I wish to call on Zenon, and I want to discover his opinion. How effective do you think CUCC is? And I also see there Emma Touros, which is the executive member of this program. But Mr. Zenon, are you with us?
Thank you. Thank you, Taras, Your Excellency, Szanowna Pani Larisa, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, first of all, to the opportunity to speak at this webinar on Canada-Ukraine cooperation opportunities. I will briefly touch on few points, but maybe I'll start a little bit with a pitch on Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. As you probably know, Chamber of Commerce has been established almost 30 years ago, and we have seen a lot of different Canadian governments and Ukrainian governments during those years, and we were consistently aiming at increasing bilateral trade and investment between the two countries. We were even active during the periods where Ukrainian government was hesitant on Canadian-Ukrainian dialogue, and I'm talking about Yanukovych era where it was a tremendous outbreak of raider ships, licenses being taken away. And the only reason I'm mentioning that, because certainly today, these days, these things are still happening from time to time, but definitely much, much different. So there's obviously a huge improvement in Ukraine in general. Just wanted to mention also that we're working very closely with institutions in Ukraine, such as Ukraine Invest, Geological Service of Ukraine, State Property Fund of Ukraine, and others, and we're promoting reopening of the privatization in Ukraine. And we also work with regions in line with decentralization and increasing role of the territorial communities, OTG. In 2021, CUCC is heading IGBAC, which is the International Council of Bilateral Associations and Chambers. And there are about, I think, 10 or 12 chambers in that right now, including ours. And Emma Touros is actually the running now or managing as General Secretary IGBAC, which gives us a little bit more power in lobbying and talking with the Ukrainian government when you have 12 chambers joined together. So that was my little pitch on CUCC. If you're not a member yet, please go to cucc.ca and make sure you sign up. And thank you, Diana. Diane Francis was actually our member of board of directors for many years, and we keep on struggling getting more and more women onto the board. So we keep on looking all the time for that gender equality that we keep on talking about. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that we're actually right now, we have actually just now finished our CUCC project, which we have managed jointly with Conference Board of Canada. That project was going from 2015 to 2021, and we have just written a final report. The project has been financed and supported by Canadian government. So, you know, report writing is very important and crucial. We keep on writing and rewriting. And finally, the final one was submitted. It will be probably soon available to the public once it's approved by GAC. But CUCC project, which is Canada-Ukraine Trade and Investment Support Project, was basically geared to SMEs in Ukraine and particularly SMEs that were run by women. We have chosen, or jointly, Conference Board of Canada and us, we have found 5 areas that we saw as interesting areas for export of Ukrainian SMEs into Canada. So those were ICT, chocolate and confectionery, apparel, footwear, and furniture. And on the investment part, so there are 2 parts: export part, which we're helping SMEs to export to Canada, and on the investment part, we're looking for projects in Ukraine and then looking for investors for these projects to invest from Canada into Ukraine. Again, it shows you how great friend Canada is to Ukraine. Usually you have countries looking only after trying to get their exporters to sell to the country. In this case, actually, Ukraine is helping Ukrainian exporters to export to Canada and investors from Canada to go to Ukraine. So again, I'd like to thank GAC and Embassy for all the support and help in this area. I don't want to throw too many numbers, but maybe just few numbers from that study. Between 2016 and 2020, 7.3% annual growth of Ukrainian exports to Canada, which is a good sign. $4.7 million of exports to Canada that were done by these SMEs, and we're talking about 49 SMEs that were supported. 29% of the exports from those were done by SMEs led by women, and 18% were coming from firms with mixed ownership. 86% of the target SMEs that CUCC worked with report an improved capacity to export, and 79% of private sector participants report that the information they received improved their ability to take advantage of opportunities to export utilizing CUFTA. We have done some of the promotion of CUFTA across Canada, from west to east, and definitely we need to do more of that, and we need to do more of that in Ukraine, because the CUFTA is there, but a lot of businesses, a lot of people still don't know what are the advantages and how to use it. We have developed many manuals, and for example, something that's called I Can Export, and this is like a manual how to export to Canada. Everything is written in this manual. It's also online at CUCC, and then there's manuals for each sector that we worked with that the Ukrainian business person can look at, open, and follow the steps how to export to Canada, which is very helpful. Otherwise, you know how long it takes to figure out who to talk to, where to go, where to look for things. Everything is in this, as I call it, export Bible to Canada. On the investment area, the CUCC intervention contributed to a total of about $280 million in investment commitment by Canadian companies, and out of 354 potential Canadian investors that participated in CUCC in investment events, 52% of them report increased investment linkages. It's not a huge number, but still half of them found some additional linkages and contacts and cooperation, which is, I think, it's quite important. Just on the gender equality, 80% participants raised awareness regarding barriers facing women-led SMEs as they attempted to export. And another area that we also cover in the project was the influence on environment of the business, and 81% participants report improved understanding of environmental aspects of international trade and investment. There are lessons that we have learned, and there's quite few of them, quite few pages. I don't want to really go through them right now because it will take too long, but just to mention few, if the primary objective of the project is to significantly increase exports, the project should be designed to work with medium to large companies. If the project is designed to reduce poverty by working with SMEs, the target should be to improve the SMEs' capacity to export, as SMEs do not have significant export capacity, cannot contribute in major way to increased exports. In the area of investment support efforts, definitely very important that the investment attraction events require the presence of the proponents of the investment opportunities, who need to make carefully prepared pitches to interested Canadian investors. And on the environmental sustainability, definitely SMEs have limited access to finance resources. This affected the capacity and interest in getting environmental certification to access international markets. Companies engaged with the project were mostly interested in finding Canadian buyers rather than in saving the environment. And on the gender equality, one of the points that came out very clearly, outcomes was that the creation or planning to create of associations of women entrepreneurs and industry clusters across Ukraine. Working in support of such associations should be encouraged among other funded projects. And just on the topic that I guess everybody mentioned already a little bit, but I just wanted to, on behalf of CUCC, also mention that definitely the way our members and the way a lot of the businesses look at Ukraine, the perception is Ukraine is at war, Ukraine is highly corrupted, and there is no rule of law. And unfortunately, these things are stuck in their head, and it's very difficult to openly go and do business in the country when you have that sort of perception. And just to support that statement, just recently, AmCham did business climate survey among 100 Ukrainian CEOs and top managers. And if you look at the results, lack of rule of law was number one, 66%, corruption, 54%, and lack of bold reform agenda, 45%. So these issues are still there, and we need to obviously pay more attention. The government is definitely trying to do things, but as Diana mentioned, still a lot of things have to be concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zenon, for this really deep analysis. And now I think that we will now turn more practically to economic issues and the voice of business in general. Dear Ladislav, could you please continue our conversation? Ladislav, are you with us? We can hear you. Oh, actually,
okay.
The microphone.
Okay. Thank you very much, Taras. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this panel. I'm very grateful. Mrs. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce shortly myself, Laszlo Kwasik, a veteran of mining. Spent over 50 years in the mining, from the bottom of practically doing front work in a mine to the executive level through this 50 years. And that's probably enough, and it's time probably to retire. But coming to the business, I looked on the main problems is in Ukraine in doing a business. What is really? And I identify 3 issues. First is a speed of execution. It definitely takes too long for government agency to respond to important business questions, requests, or any kind of application. I give you an example. Black Iron as such signed a memorandum of understanding with Ministry of Defense in November 2019 to obtain a land transfer from MOD, Ministry of Defense, to us. I repeat, November 2019. Today we are in April 21. We still don't have signed a binding agreement. 16 months later, we are not able to sign it. The process is extremely slow. There is no people who can take a lead. There is no leadership to really help us. Now, second issue, corruption. Corruption risk. You know, company is doing everything by law, by regulation. Then the local inspector or other government employee will stop it, will just stop, and for no reason. As a public company on a major stock exchange, I'm talking Toronto Stock Exchange, anytime we have this situation, we need to publicly announce this. And if we do it, it makes much harder on a company to do the business because our stock suffers, our image suffers, our ability to manage and obtain money from market get much harder. And also it doesn't make well for Ukraine. It will not attract Ukrainian investors if this will go on and on and on. You know, I give you an example. The State Ecological Inspectorate in Dnipropetrovsk suspended all work on our deposit in March 2011, and then lifted suspension in March 2017. There was no reason to suspend, and no reason was given to lift the suspension. Somebody just decided to do it and did it. But for us, was a 6 yeah, of very hardship from this. You know, we couldn't do anything in a mining field. We couldn't do anything in operational side. We couldn't do anything with the project progress. And we couldn't win because the court case was immediately lost. Also on a corruption basis. Now, we are also looking and watching very closely TIU case, a Canadian company that generates renewable energy in Ukraine. It already invested about $65 million US and built, if I remember correctly, 4 solar panels or stations rather there. Now the company is suffering from the Raider attack on their assets. You know, I just cannot believe it, what is happening. On January 26, 2021, Kyiv Economic Court refused to consider TUI claim against Nikopol ferroalloy plant. You know, these people are barring TIUs from access to electrical grid, and a court is barring. The question for me is, what is next? What is really next if things like this happen? My statement about this, what happened to IU, is based on the article I read in a national interest. The article name was, I just want to see, Ukraine lost its investment paradise. It was on April 9th, 2021. And you know, very interesting. It was written by Alexei Honcharuk and Roman Vashchuk, 2 very distinctive people. You know, the question for me is always, what next? Now, number 3, what is really difficult for us is bureaucracy. A horrendous, huge bureaucracy. There is some reason for it, some no reason. You know, Ukraine currently is transitioning from old Soviet era laws, regulation, permission, and they are trying to get to the permit level by the European standard. And this causes huge confusion, delays, and extra work. You know, transition is required in Ukraine, but it can be complicated, lead to confusion, or delay, or create extra work. You know, just to give you an example, today we are on a stage to do EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment Study, and there are 2 different standards which we need to follow, unfortunately. EIA Ukrainian, which is required for approval of environmental rights to the land, but there is also OVOS, the old Ukrainian, which engineering company refused to continue engineering if we don't have it. That we need to do it twice in 2 different standards. You know, we can complain to the left, to the right. Ukraine is a great place. You know, I'm probably 5th generation of Ukrainians which came to Denmark or Germany, we're not sure. You know, my great-grandfather was Ukrainian. I have a heart to this country, but this country needs to change faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Laszlo. And a part of the article that was written by Roman Vashchuk and ex-Prime Minister of Ukraine, Honcharuk, Yuriy Polakivsky also wrote an article published in New Europe about the situation of the TU Canada. So, dear Yuriy, I hope that you are not tired. I think that you will finish our first block of this panel.
Thank you.
Of course, I'm not tired, and I'm very honored and happy to be part of this panel. Thank you very much for inviting, and it's very great to be with everybody. You know, when Taras and I communicated, one of the topics was proposed to open up is how open is Ukraine to doing business with Canada? And I personally believe that the answers to those questions lay in several dimensions, at the very least. Some of the things were already covered by, you know, by all the speakers and by all the theses that were presented. But one dimension is of course, probably a local readiness, let's call it this way, and the readiness of the environment. Of course, there are many challenges that have been already clearly stated and voiced in terms of lack of reforms, in terms of slow moving privatization, in terms of corruption, in terms of as well rule of law. And by the way, recently there was a meeting in the office of the president that included not only a representative of American Chamber of Commerce, but of all top Ukrainian business clubs or business communities. And that, in fact, was one of the top priorities that was voiced to the president's team. This being said, I, from a practical point of view, would like to say, as I always keep on repeating to Ukrainian businessmen, that Ukrainian business people have to do more homework as well. More homework in the sense of trying to understand what instruments are already available to them in order to be attractive to Canadian investors, or in order to utilize trade relationships that are already building or being built with the help of Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement or with various other instruments. And there is plenty of ways to be more proactive and to utilize, and Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce and many other vehicles in order to breach a lack of information. Because once you do that, you can be much more proactive and seal relationship with the Canadian counterparty. This being said, another dimension is a perception, something that's been voiced here many times as well, is a perception from Canadian business community and from Canadian community in general. And I do believe that homework has to be done from Canadian side as well. Why? Because some of the problems that being represented today, they can be transformed into challenges that can be overcome, and that can present opportunities and increase the return on investment. For example, if you look at the Ukrainian environment right now and take various analysis and audits and reports, the most harsh and most conservative analysis did not realize to be true. More than that, sectors such as agribusiness and IT sector helped to balance out a fall in some of the other areas. More than that, it's not only about an abstract term of IT. You see also some of the shifts from just outsourcing model to product development, when you see a lot of Ukrainian IT entrepreneurs also focusing on product development, which generates much greater value added and therefore much greater return on investment. And there is opportunity to invest into such countries, into such companies here in Ukraine, because there is also lack of liquidity. And this problem, lack of liquidity, can lead to opportunities for Canadian businesses and providers of financing to really seal interesting deals with the reputable local business people, because there are reputable business market players as well. And that's why you also have institutions such as EBRD, IFC, European Investment Bank, and others still trying to do things here, because there is still target audience with whom they can deal. And therefore, there is a target audience with whom Canadian investor or Canadian business person can deal as well. And by the way, maybe by entering three-sided or an interesting structured deals together with multilaterals such as IFC, BRD, and so on, you can mitigate some of the deal risks, and also to really share some other risk as well. Another thing is, in terms of privatization, yes, it's not moving as fast, but we do see, with Dmitry Sinichenko being ahead of it, we do see some of the kind of spikes, historical positive spikes, which did not take place before with previous governments. Another thing is that, when you look at National Bank reserves, they're, as of now, thankfully, remaining pretty stable. And plus the banking system, from 2014, when we had 178 banks, now is under 80 banks, the banking system got cleaned up as well. So there is opportunity to enter into financial sector, and and that's why you have. This is one of many reasons, but why you have holdings like Fairfax looking at the insurance market and actually starting to play a significant role in the market. Another thing we have to understand about Ukrainian market is young business generation, which is growing, developing, and creating new cool things. And many representatives of this young business generation, they don't really care about this post-Soviet corrupted people who are still in the government. More than that, they don't even know their names. They're just doing their things and starting to move forward. And this is great. And a concrete example of that, there are projects that are being set up. Right? For example, Prom-Prilad project, which is Ivano from Kyiv. It has a strong international support as well, including from Canada, because this project is not only about social entrepreneurship or impact investing, it's also about creating a really new economy and bringing new values to the market. And because of that, if you look at some of the ratings of Forbes, Ivano from Kyiv has been voted as #1 city in Ukraine of doing business in Ukraine in terms of among the cities, because some of the mindsets of business communities are changing. Another thing in terms of real estate, which by the way is infrastructure for businesses and for retail and so on, people are shifting from the mindset of building only square meters to really establishing ecosystems. And it's very interesting to see that some of the people already moving into much more advanced models that you can see in Canada, that you can see in Western Europe. And when you look at a lot of Canadian investors that traditionally have been participating in the real estate sector in Western Europe and in Germany, for example, some of the banks prior to COVID have been fighting for good projects on 50 basis points, where with the lack of liquidity in Ukraine, you can come into the market and you can really tap into interesting projects and have a much larger return on investment with a reputable local partner. And just one other thing I would like to offer to look at is that with the unprecedented crisis on a worldwide arena today, because of Ukrainian lack of development, we don't even have certain financial instruments even implemented on legal framework basis. Because of that, some of the processes are not as interrelated and therefore has a less chance for domino effect if things will get sour. Therefore, on a global arena, Ukraine has a better chance to be almost on a same starting line to grow again. And because of that, I believe there is a strong potential for Canadian businesses to come in now and to utilize first mover advantage. So the question how open Ukraine is, it is open, but with the right partners, of course, who do need support today in liquidity. And in terms of Russia, Russia is challenging Ukrainian independence not only at the border. If you look economically, Russia is still present in Ukrainian economy, for example, through its banks, and really holding some of the Ukrainian businesses economically hostages. But if, let's say, Ukrainian businesses will find alternative for liquidity and investment, for example, from Canada, there is opportunity again for first move advantage and for moving forward with reforms and all other positive developments.
Thank you so much, Yuriy, and thank you for finishing our first block. And now it's high time to start the second, and I suggest to continue in the reversed order of this list speaker, but I think that we will start with the last Pasek, and after that with Yuriy, you, because you have to prepare your ideas and theses. So in 2 or 5 theses, I would like to invite you to detect the problem with the Ukrainian policy and propose how to solve them if it's possible, or give some recommendations. The main question is for block 2 is what do you expect from the Ukrainian authorities in terms of implementation reforms and initiatives to improve the bilateral relations? So I think we will start with Laszlo.
Okay, thank you, Taras. Yes, what is required for us? First thing, as you probably know, the law introduced investment nanny. Great idea by President Zelensky to address practically all our 3 areas of concern, but it has to assure a couple other things, which I don't see in the current law. The first thing is investment nanny needs to be highly engaged to provide timely support for the business, for company, for group. And to do this law does not specify this, and that have to be done in the near future or by example. Second thing, nanny must have real authority to get things done. And this is a problem of Ukraine. Nobody wants to make decision. And if this in this law does not come with a real authority, it will not work. But we hope it will, because I still believe that investment nanny law is a great step in the right direction. Now, if we are talking anti-corruption issue, I think the only way to solve the problem, which is not only Ukraine, if you look about 15, 20 years ago in Poland or any other country, you could see the same issue. But the country needs to prosecute people to get rid of this problem or get it at least under the control. And this is a quite urgent issue because it affects every side of the business. You imagine we want to put $1 billion in Ukraine and we are fighting for 6 years to put it. And we don't see the end to do it. We have a lineup, everything what is required. We have everything prepared to start. We have money to support it. We just cannot get things, basic things like a land. The third thing is a law reform. Law reform is very wide in Ukraine, we recognize. There are some, I would say, very successful. I see in IT, I see in a couple other places, but they need to focus. If they want investment, they need to focus on area which have a greatest current investment interest as priority. Because if we don't do it and wait the next 3-5 years, the investors will become tired of it. And I think if focus is different, a little bit different, and I can understand a different issue in the country, of course, but if you want to bring investment, you need to focus on a law reform which will support investment. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to say that we don't have a lot of time, so I suggest speakers count on 2 or 3 minutes, not more. Dear Yuriy, could you please say your recommendations?
Sure. Thank you. I would like to add in what's been said in terms of the courts reform and legal system and rule of law. Again, I think I fully agree with Diane that Ukraine has to implement proper compliance with what's required by IMF, because financing from IMF is not only about financing from IMF. It's about getting strong perception from other investors. It's about unlocking other funding. It's about eventually decreasing cost of financing for the country and as well as for the private sector afterwards. And hopefully that can also bring a wave of potential interest of other investors as well into the country. And with the, again, investment, things can change much, much better, because people will drive the process and will force the government to make changes instead of waiting until the government will decide to make some changes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Zenon, what do you think?
Thank you. I just would like to come back again to SMEs, small and medium enterprises in Ukraine. I think Ukrainian government needs to pay more attention to them, develop policies to support them. After all, SMEs are engine of economy in pretty well all the countries across the globe. And just looking at COVID and things that have happened during COVID era, and just compare Canada to Ukraine. For small and medium companies in Canada, the government immediately produced programs to support them. Personal protection equipment support, Canada emergency wage subsidy, Canada emergency business account, which is basically a zero interest loan to these companies with actually some of the amount being forgiven at the end of the payback. Very low interest rates loans, which are guaranteed by Canadian government and BDC, and these are good for up to 10 years. Canada rent subsidy, and I can go on and on and on. These are things that the government needs to do to support the SMEs in the economy. In Ukraine, I know there was a bunch of money put aside for COVID-19, and now we hear that most of that money has been used to pave roads in certain areas usually around some important people. Yes, Ukraine needs roads. We all agree they need to be done. They have done actually a tremendous job in improving them. But right now at COVID times, it's not to worry about the roads, it's worry about the economy, worry about the SMEs. So I would really like to see Ukrainian government pay attention to that. Also, what I'd like to point out is that Ukrainian government should keep in mind potential audience of 20 million Ukrainian diaspora worldwide. We work very closely with Ukrainian World Congress, which is represented in 60 countries globally. I mean, these are 20 million diaspora people. These are ambassadors for Ukraine. And so, sorry, Pani Larisa, I'm not trying to take away the ambassadors' jobs, but I mean, these are the people that can really help and do a lot for the country. So government needs to cooperate, government needs to work jointly with Ukrainian World Congress and other diaspora organizations. Also, I know the government of Ukraine is working now on policies on the labor migration. I mean, these are very, very important. Make sure you don't just tax them to death. You don't take away their money, because these are people that are working very hard outside of Ukraine. And the numbers are between 1.5 million to 5 million labor migrants. And just look at the remittance that come from abroad, over $14 billion a year. These are huge amounts of money. Make sure you treat them fairly. Make sure you treat them properly. So the policy should be definitely done on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Could you please also give your recommendations and touch the issue of the visa?
I'm not touching the issue of the visa. Nice try, though. Thanks. Yeah, you know, we can look at this from the perspective of investment attraction, but I'd like to propose a different way of looking at this. What if the investment was already here? What if Ukraine, because of what it has to offer, had already attracted a high quality, high value international investors? What if you had a solar energy investor who had built a 60 megawatt, who was generating 60 megawatts of power and wanted to build more such plants? What if you had an iron ore mine that wanted to invest $1.2 billion in the country? What if you had not one, but $2 billion property development companies that wanted to revolutionize real estate development in Ukraine for the benefit of Ukrainians? These are not random questions. Ukraine doesn't need to create a better investment attraction climate. It needs to create a better investment retention climate. I think that if you look at how much the articles about TIU's current experience are echoing inside Canada, how much people still talk about the experience that investors in the early 90s had in Ukraine. People who thought about coming here and then didn't, but people who did come here and left. The bad news travels faster than the good news. And right now, the investment retention climate is going the wrong way. And so I think that's even potentially even a more dire situation for Ukraine. So what do we do about it? How do we point this out? First of all, at all meetings at the highest levels of this morning with the president's, the deputy head of the president's office responsible for economic affairs, talking about this. In what country would I work and make point number one to the economic person in the president's office, the fact that judicial reform must move forward. It might be trite to say that this all boils down to judicial reform, but that is the truth. It was about a year ago that problems with the judiciary passed out corruption as the single greatest concern that investors had. So we, not just Canada, but the G7 in particular, are making judicial reform job number one, encouraging the president, supporting his decisions, being public about it, providing the expertise, really making it clear that there are many priorities, but this is, someone said to me yesterday, the mother of all reforms. Investment nanny, I think, is good as potentially a bit of a transitional thing, but the country shouldn't need investment nannies. The country should just, the structure should work, and they should work for everyone. And so, if you can put time and energy into a law on investment nannies, or time and energy into the system and the laws to make the whole thing work, I think I'd prefer the latter. And then there's mindset. It's not just the laws, and it's not just the post-Soviet infrastructure. It's also the post-Soviet infrastructure. And here, I think, again, we get back to people and the importance of exchanges, the importance of investing in education. I've got a really unique window into the business mindset in Ukraine, because my husband is doing an MBA here locally, while we're posted here, and I sit and I listen to some of the discussions about the case studies, and there is a mindset. There's a mindset that needs to be remolded for there to be a good good trade relations, good development of small and medium-sized enterprises, and to release that entrepreneurial potential, because it is here. There is a lot of it here. So invest in education. We need to invest in exchanges as well, not just Ukrainians to come to Canada to see the open, transparent, non-corrupt mindset in action, but also we need to invest in young Canadians coming here, especially the diaspora Canadians, so they can come and learn about modern Ukraine, not their Babtya's Ukraine, but the Ukraine that exists today, which is so dynamic, so creative, so full of energy and potential, and we're working on that. I joke about not talking about visas, because we're not going, the visa requirement is going to go away anytime soon, but there are other things that we should be facilitating. We are facilitating business travel, and also the youth mobility agreement, which we really need to get signed. And I hope I can count on the support of everyone on this call to do their part for this. We'll be talking next week with the Ukrainian authorities about it. If we can get more youth from Ukraine going to Canada and more Canadian youth coming here, the rest will fall into place. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much for your big explanation, and I think that this is really necessary to develop your question, because you're one of the policy maker there. That's really important. This really important to hear your opinion, because you as the policy maker makes our agenda in our bilateral relations. So next one will be Diane. Diane, are you with us? Oh, we can hear you. Your microphone is off.
Okay, that better?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Yeah, getting back to my experience, it was very typical. And as Zenon talked about, I was one of the founders of the Canadian-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce because, you know, after the country became independent, we were all excited. And then in 1995, I told you what happened. I started a business, I started a newspaper, everything was stolen from us. And our editor-in-chief was nearly beaten to death by thugs hired by an oligarch. And that oligarch is still very powerful in the country, okay? So my point is, you don't get a judiciary in Ukraine, you're not going to have an economy. I would not put a dime of my money into Ukraine now, as much as I care about it, as much as I write about it, until they get that judicial piece fixed. Poland did. Hungary did. They brought in, you know, we have a diaspora with a lot of lawyers and judges and a lot of really smart people who would probably go over and help teach a judiciary how to be a judiciary. This has got to happen. And what I'm saying is, and I'm using my own example, not to draw attention to myself, but think about me. Think about how much Ukraine means to me, and I won't put a dime in it yet. And I get asked all the time by companies, should I get involved in this and should I get involved in that? And I say, not until they fix the judiciary. Don't touch it with a barge pole. Hate to say it. It's an anti-message, but it's a message that Ukrainian governments and policymakers have to get across. They have to understand this. They don't have their act together, and they've got to get their act together. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility. It can't be turned around and reset in a matter of months or a year or two. Just look at what Slovakia did. Look at what Poland did. Look at what all of the satellites did. That the same rotten judicial Soviet system in place, and now they have economies that are 8 to 10 times bigger than Ukraine's. Why? Because if you have a level, fair playing field, the games begin. That's the bottom line.
Thank you so much. Dear Robert, what do you think when the Canada and Ukraine can cooperate morely in which field of policy or doing business?
Yes, thank you. I asked myself, what could I bring for value added to this forum of experts in Ukraine and experts on the economy. So I tried to think a little bit outside the box, and I hope you like the idea. I have spent, because of my interest in Caspian and Eurasian energy, a great deal of attention on the South Caucasus and Azerbaijan in particular lately. And as you may know, there was a 44-day war there toward the end of last year, the Second Karabakh War. And it struck me that although, of course, Ukraine and Azerbaijan are strong military cooperators with each other, demographically, ecologically, they have a lot in common. Territories that are internationally recognized to be part of the Ukrainian state are occupied by foreign military forces. Until very recently, territories that have never been other than internationally recognized as part of the Azerbaijani state have been occupied by foreign military forces. Now that those forces are gone from Karabakh, Azerbaijan is confronting many of the problems that Ukraine is already familiar with. One on which Canada cooperates with Ukraine, as you well know, is demining. And Azerbaijan is in desperate need of assistance with demining. Other countries are helping, but Canada and Ukraine have wide experience with this. The Armenian side, I take the opportunity to bring to your attention that the Armenian side has refused to turn over to the Azerbaijani side maps of where these mines over the course of 30 years have been laid, which technically is a violation of customary international humanitarian law. Also, there's widespread ecological destruction attested by delegations from the Council of Europe, from the European Union over the past, even 15 years ago. And I won't mention, not to go on too long, various decisions of the European Court of Human Rights that go in the same direction. So it seemed to me that assisting Azerbaijan with the recovery of formerly occupied territories, which are now begun to be repopulated, and people are losing limbs and lives every day. It would be something that Ukraine could assist with its experience from the Eastern Ukraine, and it's natural for Canada, which has this cooperation not only with Ukraine, but 3 or 4 other countries. So the idea came to me, why should not Canada and Ukraine cooperate in Azerbaijan? It's a natural for Ukraine, it's a natural for Canada, and it would be purely humanitarian demining sort of work. It's a natural. Now, in order politically that this should happen, I suppose, it would be necessary to overcome certain, I have to say, cultural stereotypes, which are very common in the West, not even in Canada, about the two sides that were combatants. The historical fact is that Azerbaijani Turks are not Ottoman Turks. They're not implicated in the events 100 years ago. I could go on about the history, but I won't, because I find it fascinating, but it's not to the subject here. So I will just conclude by saying that it's almost a no-brainer. It just has to be, bureaucratically, politically negotiated and done. Humanitarian cooperation for demining, for ecological conservation, all these problems that Ukraine is familiar with from the Eastern Ukraine, all these problems that Canada's profile, international diplomatic profile, gives it a high profile, and which it has established programs in foreign affairs to implement, and is implementing not only in Ukraine, but in other countries. This is my suggestion. It's not a suggestion for private investment, although that I'm sure that would be a possibility, but that's a bilateral issue between Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Canada, Azerbaijan. But this cooperation of Canada and Ukraine in the third country for purely humanitarian purposes seemed to me that it's a good place to deepen the existing cooperation between the two countries, Canada and Ukraine, and it might lead to places where one doesn't anticipate, like all of these things can. So that is my proposal.
Thank you so much. And I think that this idea of this project to cooperate in the field of other country between the Ukraine and Canada is really interesting. And this is the great example of the opportunities, how Canada and Ukraine can cooperate. Dear Andrew, you will finalize our second block, and then we will continue our Q&A block. Here are.
Thank you very much. I realize that the time, and there's been so many good examples of ideas put on the table that I'm not going to regurgitate that, except to say that this is all strategic stuff. Much of what you hear about corruption and so on, we were hearing right from 1993 on. On the other hand, we have also seen progress. I've seen the gateposts move over the years. We have to take the long view. And I know some people are running out of patience and say we don't have the long time, but there is a requirement for strategic patience when you're dealing with strategically difficult issues that Ukraine has faced, both geopolitically today with all the crisis going on, as well as the corruption and the judiciary, as the ambassador has said. These are fundamental. Canada is there. We will continue to be there. But I think, as Yuriy says, perhaps it's the next generation. And we've been at this now since 1991. The next generation, they're not burdened with the culture. I mean, I'm part of that old generation. But the new generation, the people are dealing with artificial intelligence and all that world, perhaps the future is with them and they will move these gateposts. But we have to stay the course, strategic patience, and let the next generation perhaps move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think that it's high time to read some questions, and previously before our panel we have collected some questions, and during it we have also received some. I will read these questions, and first question is from Mark Markevich to Her Excellency Galadza. I will read them, and after you will answer to this question. This big question. So I represented the Canadian investment company Firefox in Ukraine. In 2015, Firefox invested in the Ukrainian success story Overstar Union, a leading Ukrainian agricultural business which produces and exports chicken, eggs, and eggs products. Today, Overstar Union is publicly listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange and is among the top of 5 eggs producers in Europe. The company's products are successfully exported in 55 countries, and Firefox is proud to be a part of the Ukrainian investment success story. That is why we are currently deeply concerned that since recently Overstar Union has been under undue pressure from unstable legal claims and baseless criminal charges against the company's top management. What is happening to Overstar Union today? Strictly contradicts the publicly announced commitment of the Ukrainian government to protect the rights and interests of foreign investors. Will the Canadian embassy have the opportunity to raise the issue of the arbitrary pressure on Overstar Union at the highest level and inform the Ukrainian government about the negative impact of such cases on investment climate in Ukraine?
Thanks for the question. The one-word answer is yes, but let me give you a little bit more than yes. Fairfax is a great and well-respected Canadian company, and I'm particularly proud that they are in Ukraine because of how they operate, and that's make the big investment in their sector and then reinvest the profits in this smaller opportunities, the local opportunities that they see around them. So and so some of those small and medium-sized enterprises really do benefit from the business model that Fairfax uses, and I find it fascinating. And what's happening to them right now is not unique, unfortunately. These legal attacks, these court-based attacks to deprive them of their investments and of their market and of the business that they have built. We routinely raise the issues that Canadian companies are having in Ukraine in the highest offices. We raise them because that's our job as the embassy and as Canada's representatives here. But we also raise it because it makes the important point. It shows. I raised Overstar by name with the Prime Minister 3 weeks ago. And it shows that we are experiencing as a country and as Canadian companies, all of the problems that exist in the Ukrainian system. So they are not generic problems, they're very specific ones with well-intentioned people behind them, with really smart investors, with good people. They're doing good things in Ukraine, and they're being literally robbed of their opportunities through a Ukrainian system that permits it. So yes, we do raise these specific instances regularly, and we will continue to. And quite frankly, they drive me as well, because these are Canadian companies that have saw fit to come to take that risk and to come to Ukraine. But more importantly, what's happening by Ukrainians is depriving other Ukrainians of the things that they fought for on the Maidan, that openness, that transparency, the ridding of corruption, a judicial system that works, and a path to greater integration with Europe and the West, where these things don't happen. So thanks for the question. We talk about these things all the time, almost regardless of who we speak to in Parliament, in the Prime Minister's office, and with the President.
Thank you so much for your answer. And the next question is from Ivan Yakov, and this is the question indirectly, so I will give this question to the people, to the speaker that is more like relative to this question. Such cases as CUCC Canada, do they scare away a part of investment in Ukraine, the whole world community, that Ukraine is a country with unexpected surprises, mostly negative? I think that this question can be answered by the man who know about this case and who works with the foreign business, maybe Zenon. Could you please comment this question? I can repeat that. We can hear you, your microphone is off.
I said, for some reason, I don't hear you that well. Maybe you can just speak a little bit louder.
Okay, I can repeat the question. Cases such as CUCC Canada, do they scare away, apart from investment in Ukraine, the whole world community? That Ukraine is a country with unexpected surprises, mostly negative.
Well, I mean, as we spoke in the whole webinar, surprises, yes, there are lots of surprises, but I mean, just summing up what I have mentioned before, when we had Yanukovych era, before the Maidan, and what we have now, there's a huge change, huge difference, and definitely the surprises still come from time to time, and that's why everybody on the panel keeps on calling specifically for the judicial reform, rule of law as number one, because then you can avoid a lot of these surprises. But until we have some of these things fixed, there will be some surprises here and there. But I don't think that, you know, some of these surprises scare totally everyone from Ukraine, because as we know, there are quite few Canadian companies that have invested, and yes, they have some issues. There are others that have invested as well. And I mean, I am myself also a businessman, besides being president of Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, and we have invested in Ukraine. And unfortunately, one big surprise was illegal occupation of Crimea by Russia, where we lost 2 of our offshore projects to Russia. So it's not only that we have surprises, happening directly from Ukraine and Ukrainian government. There are also outside forces, and we have to be ready for everything. But I am still convinced and positive on Ukraine, and definitely as a businessman doing some business in Ukraine, and also as a head of Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, we'll keep on working with our members, with other companies that want to invest, and work with Ukrainian government and talk to people in the parliament, and throw our ideas at them, and hopefully this thing will change and eventually they'll become better. Yes, we all would like to have everything resolved in 1 year. What was destroyed over 70 years cannot be changed in 1 year. I agree, 2030 is also a little bit too long, but we have moved quite a bit when we look at the beginning of new independent Ukraine and now, and I'm staying positive on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see that the time is going out, but I will maybe ask the last question. This is the question from myself. And yesterday I answered to one's letter and I caught myself thinking that fortunately now Ukraine again arises in the global media and attracts attention all over the world. But unfortunately, the issue is a war. So what is the dominant problem for foreign business, particularly Canadian? Danger of war or absence of the rule of law, oligarchism, and the level of corruption, etc. So I think this question can be directed to the businessmen, and I want to maybe invite Yuriy and Leslav to give the answer to this question. Yuriy, you will maybe start.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I can say from my point of view, it's a rule of law and other things, because those things put holes in our fundamental ability to withstand external, aggression. So the stronger we'll be internally as Ukraine, the more ability we can have to counter, any aggression and other things. So I think, and there are investors that believe in Ukraine, and there are investors who look positively at risk-reward ratio. Therefore, we have to get things more stable at home, and then other things will come.
Dear Leslav?
I have to agree generally with Yuriy. I have the same point of view. I think the rule of law is number one, because it will make Ukraine stronger. It will make it transparent. It will make it much easier to do the business. But there are two other. I think the speed of executions, the issue of managing by governments the new business in a country have to be in some kind of a priority line. It should be something which government takes care, and this is lacking. Plus, I also think that bureaucracy is an issue. But if countries solve this problem, I think Russian aggression can be secondary to this for the business, for the climate, for the investment climate in the country. I think Ukraine will have a chance to have a good investment, but it have to clean their act. It have to clean the issues have internally. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I apologize for not asking all the questions and to all the speakers because our time is over. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to our listeners, to our viewers, thank you to our speakers. To Ottawa, I wish have a nice day, and them who is in Kyiv now, I wish a good night and stay healthy and take care of yourself. See you. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
So much.